The Unseen Connection, a Madrid miracle. Police car light stopped scrolling. You won't believe what happened next. Have you ever felt the universe nudge you, forcing you to see beyond your own world? This story might just change how you look at strangers forever. Smash that like button if you believe in second chances and destiny, and subscribe so you don't miss our next gripping tale. And seriously, drop a comment. Where are you watching this from? We love connecting with our global family. Part 1: The Weight of Despair. Lucia Vargas gripped the strap of her worn backpack with one hand, her other arm cradling one of her sleeping children. Her other two, their tiny feet dragging, walked beside her. The sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, painting the Madrid sky in hues of orange and purple. But for Lucia, the park was their only refuge. There was no home to return to. They slept in a temporary shelter, but entry was only permitted after 8 p.m. During the day, they simply wandered, sometimes seeking shade, sometimes searching for scraps of food. Lucia was 32, at least according to her faded ID. Her face, however, told a different story. Dark circles beneath her eyes, chapped lips, dark hair tied back with a frayed elastic band. She had been a beloved primary school teacher, brilliant at her craft, until one devastating day the director announced the school's closure due to restructuring. Months later, her husband, a man of aggressive temper and no patience, vanished without a trace. Since then, everything had been an uphill battle. Every evening, the same weary routine. They would trek to the nearest park, find an empty bench, and simply wait for time to pass. Sometimes, she'd invent stories or sing songs to distract the children. But today, she had nothing left. The heat was suffocating. They hadn't eaten more than dry bread all day, and her head pounded like a relentless drum. She collapsed onto a metal bench, settling her children beside her, covering them with her thin jacket. Just for a second, she closed her eyes. Part 2: A Glimmer of Unforeseen Fate. Across the park, a tall, impeccably groomed man with silver hair emerged from a sleek black car, driven by a chauffeur. His name was Don Alejandro Castillo, owner of one of Spain's most powerful automotive chains. He wore a crisp light gray suit, an imported watch and polished shoes. He had just finished a meeting with investors at a restaurant facing the park and was now walking towards his car, scrolling through notifications on his phone. "Señor, your flight to Barcelona leaves tomorrow at 7. Shall I confirm the hotel?" asked Inés, his assistant, walking briskly beside him. "Yes, confirm it," he replied without looking up. Just then, something caught his attention. A flicker, a peculiar sensation. He turned his head and saw her. A young woman, head slumped forward, clutching 3 sleeping children in her arms. One of them was dangerously close to sliding off the edge of the bench. She wasn't moving. Alejandro stopped dead in his tracks. He frowned, a crease forming between his brows. He didn't understand why, but something compelled him to walk towards her. "Are you all right, madam?" he asked, his voice firm. Nothing. Not a word. He took another step closer. He saw the faint tremor in her hands, the paleness of her face. Inés caught up, alarmed. "What are you doing? You don't know her. She's unconscious," Alejandro stated dryly. He pulled out his phone. "I'm calling an ambulance." The minutes that followed were surreal for him. He cradled the woman's head while dialing 112. He took off his jacket and gently placed it over the children's shoulders. One of them briefly opened his eyes, looked at him, and drifted back to sleep. "Lucia, mama," the little one whispered. The name etched itself into Alejandro's mind. When the paramedics arrived, Alejandro didn't leave. They loaded the woman onto a stretcher, and he insisted they take the children too. Inés urged him to leave, but he refused. "Tell me which hospital you're taking her to," he ordered, noting the name on a card. Finally, back in his car, he stared out the window for a few silent seconds. Inés watched him, confused. "Are you all right?" "I don't know." The car pulled away. A few meters from the empty bench, the sun vanished behind the trees. No one knew it yet, but something had changed forever. Have you ever witnessed a small act of kindness that changed someone's life? Share your story in the comments. Could inspire others. Part 3. The Unsettling Truth. Alejandro didn't sleep well that night. He woke twice for no reason, the faces of the woman and the children vivid in his mind. He couldn't recall the last time something had affected him so deeply. He was accustomed to dealing with numbers, figures, properties, never with broken people. At dawn, he was already up, drinking black coffee on his 20th floor balcony, overlooking the city, far from the noise, the dust, the sweat of the streets. But something within him remained restless. He called Ines. "Did you find out the woman's full name?" he asked bluntly. "Her name is Lucia Vargas," she replied without a greeting. 32 years old, former teacher. She was dismissed when the government sold the school where she worked. She was married but reported violence and left her husband a year ago. She lives with her children in a temporary shelter, but they had no space this week. That's why she was in the park. Alejandro clenched his jaw. He said nothing for several seconds. And the children? Triplets. They're 5 years old. Mateo, Diego, and Ricardo. He hung up without another word, staring at the horizon in thought. Then he dialed another number. "Take me to Hospital General, Pediatric Emergency Entrance. I want to know how Lucia Vargas is." Less than an hour later, Alejandro walked through the hospital corridors with firm steps. He was dressed more simply, in a long-sleeved shirt without a jacket. He didn't want to draw attention. He still didn't know why he felt this way. He only knew he couldn't ignore what he had seen. At reception, it was difficult to get information. Finally, a nurse recognized him. Everyone knew his face from economic news. She agreed to show him the file. "She's stable. Severe dehydration and extreme fatigue. She's awake now but doesn't want to see anyone. And the children? They're fine. We gave them juice, bread, and found them clean pajamas." Alejandro nodded, not looking at anyone directly. He sat on a bench in the hallway. From there, he could hear the children's voices in a nearby room, playing, laughing softly. The sound disarmed him. He spent almost an hour there, motionless. When Ines arrived, she found him exactly the same, elbows on his knees, staring into space. "It's not your responsibility, Alejandro. I didn't say it was. You're acting as if it is." He remained silent. Just then, a female voice echoed from down the hallway. It was Lucia. "Who are you?" She stood weak but firm, in a borrowed gown, her hair tied back as best she could. She looked at him with suspicion. Alejandro slowly stood up. He didn't want to intimidate her. "I was just passing through the park. I saw that you—" He paused, searching for words. "Needed help, and I wanted to make sure you were all right." Lucia frowned. "I'm fine now. I don't need anything." "I didn't mean to offend you," he said with a slight gesture. "I just wanted to know your name." She looked at him for a few more seconds, then turned and re-entered her room. Alejandro sighed, weary. Ines crossed her arms. "Now what?" "Now I'm leaving." As they walked towards the exit, Alejandro pulled a business card from his wallet and left it at reception. "In case she needs anything," he murmured. He left the hospital without looking back. But the name Lucia remained lodged in his chest like a thorn. Do you think Lucia should have accepted Alejandro's help, even from a stranger? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. Part 4. A Heavy Conscience. Lucia closed the room door with trembling hands. She leaned against the wall for a few seconds, trying to process the swirl of emotions boiling in her chest. What was a man like that doing in a public hospital? Why her? Why now? She looked back at her children. Mateo played with a plastic car some doctor had given them. Diego slept, hugging a blue blanket. Ricardo watched her silently with those big, serious eyes so much like his father's. "Is everything okay, Mama?" he asked in a tiny voice. Lucia forced a smile and knelt to caress his hair. "Yes, mi amor. I'm just tired." The truth was, she had been tired for months. Tired of the fear, of the hunger, of pretending everything was under control. Every night, She slept with one eye open, fearing someone from the shelter would get too close to her children. Every day, she walked aimlessly, just to keep them moving and prevent them from asking questions she didn't know how to answer. She had stopped counting the job rejections, the uncomfortable glances when she mentioned her 3 children, the times they told her she was overqualified or should look for something else. It was as if the world was shouting that there was no place for her anymore. She got up with difficulty and looked at herself in the small bathroom mirror. Her face was haggard, her cheeks sunken, and there was a purple bruise under one eye she couldn't remember getting. She splashed cold water on her face. She couldn't break down now. The man's face returned to her mind. He wasn't young but not old either. He had the demeanor of someone in charge, someone used to being heard. But his eyes, there was something strange about them. It wasn't pity. It was something harder to identify. It seemed like guilt. But guilt for what? She sighed and left the bathroom. She sat next to Diego, who was still asleep, and stroked his forehead. "We're going to be okay," she whispered, more to convince herself than them. That night, the hospital allowed them to stay. The nurse brought them a tray with rice, beans, and juice. For the children, it was a feast. Lucia barely tasted a bite. Something in her stomach wouldn't settle. When all 3 fell asleep, she sat in the chair beside the bed and pulled a crumpled sheet from her bag. It was the last receipt from the shelter. They had until Friday to present proof of employment, or they would lose their spot. 3 days remained. She had no options. She looked at the envelope with the card the man had left. She didn't open it. She watched it for a moment, then put it back in her backpack. She didn't need anyone's help. She had survived this far alone, and she would continue to do so. But as she tried to sleep, in the silence broken only by the hum of the fans, a small but insistent part of her wondered if this time, perhaps, she should make an exception. Part 5. A different kind of struggle. For the next few days, Lucia avoided thinking about the man in the park. She was more concerned with earning some money before Friday. She left the hospital on Tuesday afternoon, her children clinging to her skirt, and walked straight to the shelter. Luckily, her space hadn't been occupied yet. They gave her a mattress for 4, 2 blankets, and 1 more night of reprieve. On Wednesday, she woke early to look for work. She left the children with a shelter volunteer for a few hours and scoured the streets, asking in cafes, shops, markets. Everywhere, they told her the same thing: "We're not hiring. We don't accept people with such young children. Come back another day." She returned to the shelter exhausted, her feet swollen and eyes burning. She found the children drawing with broken crayons on a piece of newspaper. They smiled as if the world were simple. She smiled too, just for them. The next day, while serving soup to her children in the dining hall line, a social worker approached with a white envelope. "This arrived for you, Lucia." She took it with suspicion. There was no sender's name, only "for Lucia Vargas." She opened it carefully. Inside was a smaller envelope, with a food voucher and a debit card, and a handwritten note. "For the children. I am not buying your dignity." Lucia felt her stomach clench. There was no signature, but she knew immediately who had sent it. She closed her eyes for a moment. It was a mix of relief, anger, and shame. She returned the envelope to the social worker without a word. That night, she couldn't sleep. The next morning, as she walked with the children towards a church that offered free breakfast, she saw him. He stood across the street, hands in his pockets, expression neutral. He wasn't in a suit, but he didn't blend in with the neighborhood folk either. Lucia stopped. Her children didn't notice. "Are you following us?" she asked, raising her voice just enough for him to hear. Alejandro calmly crossed the street. He stopped at a safe distance. "No, I just came to see if you had accepted the help." "I didn't accept it." "I know." Lucia looked at him, her lips pressed together. She didn't know what to expect from him. She didn't understand his persistence. She didn't understand why he made her feel so confused. "Why are you doing this?" she finally asked, her voice softer. Alejandro took a deep breath. It wasn't a question he could easily answer. "Because I couldn't forget you. Because seeing you collapse on that bench made me feel something." And I'm not used to feeling anything. Lucia blinked. For a second, she seemed to lose her balance. The children tugged at her hand. I don't need you to save me, she said firmly, though her voice trembled. And I'm not here to save you, he replied. I just want you to have one more option. She looked at him one last time and continued walking with the children. She said nothing more. Alejandro stood there, motionless, watching them walk away. He wouldn't insist, but he wouldn't disappear entirely either. Sometimes the most silent help is the hardest to accept. Part 6. A revelation that shakes worlds. Alejandro returned to his office that same afternoon, but he wasn't his usual self. He sat at his desk, not opening his laptop. His gaze was fixed on the glass wall overlooking the city from above. Cars looked like toys, people just fast-moving dots, aimless like her. Are you going to review the reports for the Nueva Esperanza project? Ines asked, entering without knocking. Leave them there, he replied without looking at her. Ines placed the folder on the table and watched him for another moment. Something about her boss's tense stillness unsettled her. She closed the door as she left, knowing it wasn't the time for comments. Alejandro opened the folder instinctively. He began reviewing the pages without much attention until a name caught his eye. Nueva Esperanza Residential Complex, demolition of former primary school. A sharp pain shot through his chest. He pulled out his phone and quickly accessed the project's digital file. He confirmed what he feared. The school where Lucia had worked had been purchased by his own company. The closure had been approved by him nearly 2 years ago. He closed his eyes, stunned. At that moment, he understood everything. Not only had he seen her fall in front of him, children in her arms, but he was also part of the reason she had fallen. He leaned back in his chair, head tilted back. He had never considered what happened to people after an acquisition. Projects were just that. Papers, numbers, signatures. Not people. Lucia had been one of them. The next day, Alejandro canceled his agenda and went directly to the shelter's address. He didn't go in. He stayed outside, observing from afar. He saw Lucia leave with her children hand in hand, hurrying, walking towards who knows where. She didn't see him. He pulled out his phone and called Ines. I need you to find me a small, simple but safe house. Near public transport, schools, and not in areas with a history of evictions. I want the papers ready today. It's for Lucia. Yes, and I want the offer to come from someone else. Not my name or my company. She won't accept it if she knows it's me. Are you trying to atone for the past? I'm trying not to repeat it. He hung up. That afternoon, Lucia returned to the shelter and found her children playing with a new book. One of the volunteers had given it to them. It was a children's story, with colorful drawings and large letters. Diego held it with both hands as if it were a treasure. Mama, look, Mateo said excitedly. It has a story about a brave mama. Lucia smiled tiredly and sat with them. She read the story aloud in a low voice. As she read, she thought of all the things she had lost, and all that she still had to protect. After putting them to bed, she went to the reception to ask if anyone had left anything for her. The receptionist handed her a beige, sealed envelope. She opened it slowly. Inside was a 6-month lease agreement, fully paid, for a modest house in a quiet neighborhood. There were no names, just instructions to present herself with identification. Lucia stared at it for a long time. Something inside her softened, but another part remained firm, distrustful. Nothing was free. It never had been. She stayed awake late, undecided whether to accept. The weight of the guilt was Alejandro's. But the weight of survival, that was still hers. Part 7. A new beginning, fraught with doubt. Lucia walked slowly down the sidewalk, the crumpled contract in her bag, her children clutching her skirt. She hadn't said anything yet, wasn't even sure she would. This house could be a trap, or it could be the first open door in a long time, and that too was frightening. She arrived at the address at noon. The sun was strong, and the children were restless. The street was quiet, with thin but living trees. The houses were humble, painted brick, some with plants in the windows. She stopped in front of house number 12. It was simple. A low gate, a small porch, and a white door. It didn't look abandoned. It had clean curtains and pots with withered flowers. Lucia swallowed hard and rang the doorbell. No one answered. She rang again, harder. Then an older woman opened the door with a kind gesture. Lucia Vargas? Yes, that's me. Come in, dear. They told me you were coming. This is your home for the next 6 months. Lucia frowned. Who paid for it? They just asked me to receive you and give you the key. I don't know anything else. But if you like, we can go in and check everything together. Lucia hesitated for a few seconds. Then she gently nudged the children inside. As the little ones ran from one room to another, marveling at having space, beds, and even their own stove, Lucia inspected everything with the keen eye of someone who had slept on the ground many times. The house was modest but clean. It had 2 bedrooms, a living room with an old but comfortable sofa, a kitchen with the essentials, and a bathroom with running water. That was luxury for them. In the fridge there was milk, bread, eggs. In the pantry, rice and beans. Everything carefully placed. What if they're watching me? She murmured to herself. Mama, are we going to live here? Ricardo asked from the living room. Lucia knelt in front of him. Just for a while. Until Mama gets a job and we can pay for our own place. Is that okay? The boy nodded, hugging her tightly. That night, when the children were sleeping for the first time in separate beds, Lucia sat on the porch with a cup of hot tea. Something stirred within her. She didn't know if it was relief, fear, or both. Then a silhouette crossed the gate. Alejandro. He was alone. No chauffeur, no suit. He wore a light shirt and jeans. In his hand, he carried a bag of children's storybooks. Lucia stood up abruptly. How do you know I'm here? I arranged everything. Why? Because it was my company that destroyed your school, that left you without work. And I also pushed you to where you are now. The least I can do is take responsibility for what I did. Lucia pressed her lips together. Her eyes filled with contained rage. You didn't push me. I fell, but because this system is rotten, and I don't need you to save me. I'm not your cause for redemption. I know, he said, his voice serene. That's why I didn't come to save you. I came to tell you the truth. And if that's all I can give you, that's fine. He handed her the bag of books and turned to leave. Lucia watched him walk away, her heart pounding. She didn't know whether to yell at him, run after him, or lock the door. But one thing was clear. This man was no longer just a distant figure. He had crossed the line. And now he was inside her world, though she didn't yet know if that was good or dangerous. What do you think Lucia should do? Should she accept his help, or try to stand on her own? Tell us your thoughts in the comments. Part 8. The Ghost of the Past Returns. The house began to feel a little like home. The children adapted quickly. Each day, they woke with more energy, argued less, and even laughed without guilt. Lucia, however, remained on high alert. She slept with one eye open, as if expecting it all to vanish overnight. The first few days in the new home passed with cleaning, organizing, and trying to find a way to generate income. Lucia sent resumes to public schools, to small businesses. She even considered giving private lessons again if she found students. There were no answers yet, but she refused to sit idly by. One afternoon, as she hung clothes in the small backyard, she heard the front door open forcefully. Mama! It was Mateo, agitated. Lucia ran to the living room. All 3 children were there, huddled in a corner. Standing in the doorway was him, Samuel, the children's father. He wore a crumpled shirt, an unlit cigarette tucked behind his ear, and a look that made her instinctively recoil. He had that expression she knew so well, a mix of mockery and menace. So here you are, hiding in rich people's houses, he said with a twisted smile. Who's supporting you now, Lucia? Get out of my house, she replied firmly. Your house, please. He took a step inside. I heard someone's helping you. A businessman, right? How convenient. And you called me opportunistic. Lucia stepped between him and the children. You have no right to be here. You didn't sign any custody papers. You didn't look for me for months. You didn't show up when they had a fever, or when we had nothing to eat. Samuel let out a dry laugh. And now you want to play the protective mother? Look, Lucia, I came to see what's going on because if you're getting money from someone, I want my share. They're my children too. Aren't they? No! She screamed. You didn't come for them. You came out of self-interest. Like always. The children trembled in silence. Diego cried soundlessly. Look, I don't want trouble, Samuel said, raising his hands as if he were the good guy in the story. But if you keep going down this path, I can ask for custody. A judge might listen to me. After all, who's going to believe you? An unemployed woman, without a husband, with mysterious help from a millionaire. Lucia felt the ground move beneath her. Get out now, she said in a low voice. And if you ever come near us again, I'll report you. Samuel stared at her for a long second. Then he smiled contemptuously. We'll see each other soon. He left, slamming the door. Lucia collapsed to the floor. The children ran to her. She hugged them tightly, feeling she couldn't protect them from everything. Not alone, not always. That night, she waited for everyone to sleep and dialed the number she had unknowingly memorized. Yes, Alejandro's voice answered. He showed up, the children's father. He threatened me. He said he can ask for custody. Silence. I'm on my way, Alejandro said firmly. Lucia hung up without saying anything else. She looked out the window, and for the first time, she didn't feel guilty for not being able to face everything alone. Part 9. The Promise of Protection. Lucia spent the night without sleeping a wink. Every sound outside seemed like a threat. Every shadow at the window a possible figure returning. She didn't wake the children. She watched them sleep, bodies tangled in old blankets, oblivious to the fear that gripped their mother. Alejandro arrived at the house at dawn. He asked no questions. He carried a bag with bread, fruit, and coffee. He sat in the kitchen, silently, while Lucia stood with her arms crossed, trembling. What are you going to do? She asked bluntly. Whatever it takes to protect them, he replied. Lucia didn't answer. There was a part of her that wanted to believe him. Another part, the oldest, most wounded part, told her that no one does anything without expecting something in return. I can't run again, she murmured, more to herself than to him. But you can't stay waiting for him to come back either, Alejandro said, looking at her calmly. That same afternoon, Lucia spoke with a lawyer, a friend of a former colleague. She explained the case. The woman was clear. If Samuel claimed custody and could prove he had a job or minimal stability, he could initiate legal proceedings. It wouldn't be easy, but not impossible, especially if he managed to make her seem unstable or influenced by third parties. Lucia hung up the call with her heart in her throat. I can't risk them, she told Alejandro that night. I can't wait for him to decide when to destroy us. I have to get them out of here. Where would you go? I don't know, but I can't sit here waiting for the next blow. Alejandro watched her intently. Then let me help you. Lucia shook her head. No more favors. I just need to disappear for a while. Be far away. I can find a place. Why? Because you matter to me, Lucia, he said with a firmness that disarmed her. Because I swear this isn't about guilt anymore. She lowered her gaze. For the first time in a long time, she felt heard. Seen. At 3 a.m, Lucia carefully woke the children. We're going to play a game, she whispered. We're going on an adventure, but you have to be very quiet. Like ninjas, right? All three nodded, half asleep. Alejandro was already waiting outside in a discreet dark car. No one saw them leave, no one followed them. They drove for hours in silence, crossing secondary roads, small towns, dirt tracks. The sun was beginning to rise when they reached an isolated spot. A simple house, surrounded by trees, with an old gate and wild flowers growing unchecked. Lucia got out with the children and took a deep breath. For the first time in days, the air didn't smell of fear. It smelled of wet earth, of calm. Where are we? Ricardo asked. In a safe place, Alejandro said, opening the house door. Inside, there were clean beds, water, some food in the pantry. Enough for a few days. There are no records here, no nearby neighbors. No one will come looking for you, he assured her. Lucia nodded. She sat on the edge of the bed and covered her face with her hands. Alejandro approached but didn't touch her. He just said, "You're not alone." She didn't respond. But that night, for the first time, she slept without nightmares. And so did the children. Part 10. Unveiling the deepest scar. They spent 3 days in the hidden house. The calm was strange, as if it didn't quite belong. Lucia cooked with what was available, washed clothes by hand, and went out to the yard to watch the children run among the trees. They seemed happy, and she would be too, if not for the permanent knot in her stomach. Alejandro spent his mornings in the nearest town, making calls from a payphone and buying essentials. He always returned with fresh bread, fruit, and a little something for the children. A drawing notebook, colored pencils, used storybooks. That afternoon, however, was different. Lucia was sitting at the entrance, cleaning some beans. When she saw him arrive, his brow furrowed. She noticed the tension in his shoulders, the unusual silence. Something was wrong. "Is everything okay?" she asked, setting the bowl aside. Alejandro sat opposite her on a wooden stool. "I need to tell you something. I can't keep it anymore." Lucia looked at him without responding. Her heart began to beat faster. She was used to confessions coming with a storm. 2 years ago, when I lost my job, they said the school was sold. But I never knew to whom, she said, anticipating something. Alejandro lowered his gaze. "It was to me. Well, to my company. I signed the purchase. The project included the demolition of the building. I never asked who worked there. I just saw the numbers." Lucia felt the air escape her lungs. She stood up abruptly, stunned. "Are you telling me that you destroyed my school?" "Yes. You left me jobless? Unintentionally. I didn't know." "You didn't know because you never cared," she cried, tears welling up. "For you, it was just papers. For me, it was my life. It was my calling. It was everything I had." The children were listening from the window. Alejandro glanced at them and lowered his voice. "Lucia, I'm telling you because I don't want to keep lying. I realized it late, but I couldn't keep turning a blind eye." She hugged herself, trembling. "And now you show up with food, with houses, with help. What do you want? Redemption? I want to fix what I broke, even if it's just a little. Not for image or out of guilt, because I saw you on that bench. And I haven't been able to forget you since." Lucia looked at him for a long time. Her eyes were full of rage, but also something more difficult to admit. Disappointment. "I hated you," she finally said. "When I found out they were closing the school, I cursed men like you. Cold, distant, playing with other people's lives from an air-conditioned office. You don't know what it's like to look your children in the eyes and have nothing to give them." "I don't," he admitted. "But I want to learn." She looked away. The pain was still immense, but there was something in his voice, something sincere. "You can't buy my forgiveness," she said firmly. "I don't want to buy anything, just to be here. If you let me." Lucia didn't respond. She walked into the house without a word, her eyes burning and her chest heavy. But she didn't close the door. She left it ajar. And Alejandro stayed sitting outside, waiting. What would you do if you were Lucia? Could you forgive someone who unknowingly caused you so much pain? Share your thoughts below. Part 11. The Slow Path to Trust. For the following days, Lucia avoided Alejandro. She didn't speak to him. She didn't look at him. She barely responded with a gesture if he asked something. It wasn't out of pride, but out of confusion. He represented everything she had learned to distrust. Power, control, decisions made without considering the consequences. And at the same time, there he was, getting up early, washing dishes, sweeping the yard, playing with the children as if he didn't carry the weight of his actions. Lucia watched him from the window. Sometimes she'd see him smile while teaching Mateo to tie his shoes, or explaining to Diego how to use a magnifying glass to see insects, or simply sitting in silence beside Ricardo when the boy didn't want to talk. These things broke down her defenses, but they weren't enough. One morning, while the children were still asleep, Lucia went out to the porch and sat beside him. Alejandro held a cup of coffee in his hands, his eyes tired. "I haven't decided if I can forgive you," she said, without looking at him. Alejandro nodded, not replying. "But I realized that I don't want to keep hating you either." He turned slightly towards her. "Thank you for saying that." Lucia took a deep breath. "What are you going to do when all this is over?" "I'm already doing it," he replied. And that same afternoon he fulfilled his promise. Alejandro returned to the city in silence. Ines waited for him in his office with a folder full of papers. She didn't ask questions. She just executed. "Are you sure about this?" "More than ever." He signed all the documents without stopping. He donated the land of the old school to an educators' cooperative. He renounced the development rights. He canceled the multimillion-dollar investment that was underway. He knew lawsuits would come. He knew his partners would question him. But he didn't care. Then he asked his legal team to prepare a voluntary confession. He handed over documents proving that several evictions, including Lucia's, were carried out irregularly. He knew that information would make him lose contracts. He knew some would see him as a traitor. He didn't care. He left everything in the hands of his lawyers. He turned off his phone and returned to the refuge. Lucia was waiting for him at the entrance. She didn't ask him anything. She just watched him get out of the car, his shoulders lowered, as if he had left a part of himself behind. Alejandro approached with slow steps. "I did it," he said plainly. "What?" "I gave up the land. I handed over the eviction papers. There's no turning back." Lucia stared at him, not in surprise but because of what that act meant. It wasn't just justice. It was real loss, giving up money, power, reputation. For her, for the children, for doing the right thing. "And now what are you going to do?" she asked. "Stay here if you'll let me." She took a step towards him, then another. There were no tears, no speeches, just a long, silent hug, in the middle of the dirt yard, with the trees swaying in the wind. It wasn't forgiveness yet, but it was a beginning. Part 12, A Foundation of Hope. A week later, Lucia was notified by a legal assistant from the court. Samuel's custody request had been rejected. The judge overseeing the case considered the documents provided by Alejandro's lawyer, which showed not only the irregularities of the eviction, but also the biological father's history of abandonment and violence. Lucia read the resolution several times, with trembling hands. She didn't cry, nor did she scream. She just felt a peace so profound that, for a moment, she didn't know what to do with it. The children played in the garden, oblivious to what it all meant. "Is it official?" Alejandro asked when he saw her come out with the papers. Lucia nodded. "The judge gave me full custody." He managed to smile. It wasn't a celebratory smile, but one of relief. "So now you are truly free." Lucia looked at him with a serene expression. "Free, yes, but tired too." They sat on the porch steps. Alejandro brought 2 glasses of cold water and offered them to her. "I never asked you something," she said after a while. "What do you expect from all this?" Alejandro looked at her sincerely. "Nothing you don't want to give." "I'm not used to that," Lucia confessed. "Whenever someone did something for me, they expected something in return, even when they didn't say it. I wasn't used to not having control over everything either," he said. "But I learned with you that there are things more important than being right or having power." Lucia observed him in silence. Finally, she was beginning to see Alejandro as a man, not as a symbol, not as an enemy nor as a savior, just as someone who, like her, was trying to do things right with the tools he had. That night, the children had a party in the garden. They hung drawings on branches, laid blankets on the ground, and asked their mother to tell them a story. Alejandro watched them from a safe distance, chuckling softly at their antics, as if he felt out of place, though less and less so. When Lucia finished reading, Mateo ran to Alejandro with a book in his hand. "Can you read this one?" Alejandro awkwardly took the book. "Of course, but you'll have to help me with the voices." The 3 children sat around him. Lucia watched them from the window. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to imagine a future that wasn't just about surviving the next day. Part 13, Building a Shared Future. The next day, Lucia was called to formally testify before the judge. The magistrate was clear. She now had full responsibility for the children. There would be no more shelters, no surprise visits, no threats from third parties. Lucia left the courthouse with the official papers in her hand. Alejandro waited for her on the sidewalk. Well, she held up the papers with a calm smile. They're mine. Completely mine. They hugged without a word. It wasn't just a legal victory. It was a reaffirmation of everything they had lived through. And although the road ahead remained uncertain, for the first time, Lucia wasn't afraid of tomorrow. Because she knew that no matter what happened, she was no longer alone. A week after the hearing, life at the country house continued with a strange sense of normalcy. Alejandro had settled into a back room, with few belongings, but with a constant presence. He didn't impose, didn't command. He simply was there. And that, for Lucia, was becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. That afternoon, while the children drew on the porch, Alejandro appeared with a bag in his hand. I went to town. I brought bread, cheese, and this, he said, pulling out a small hand-bound book. I found it at a fair. It's a collection of stories written by rural teachers. Lucia took it delicately, as if it were a fragile object. She opened it and silently read the pencil dedication on the first page. For those who never stopped teaching, even when they no longer had a classroom. Her eyes welled up. Thank you, she whispered. Alejandro smiled but said nothing more. He sat silently beside her. A few minutes passed. Then Lucia closed the book, turned to him and spoke plainly. What did you see in me that day? Alejandro didn't pretend not to understand. I saw a woman who wouldn't give up, even when she had nothing. I saw a strength I never knew I possessed. I was broken, and yet you cared for them, hugged them, made them smile. Do you know how many people in my world have everything and can't achieve that? Lucia lowered her gaze. It was very hard for me to let you in. I know, he said. But now that you're here, it scares me for you to leave. Alejandro looked at her intently. I don't plan on leaving. Not unless you ask me to. She swallowed. I don't know how to do this. I've never been with someone who didn't want to control me, who didn't make me feel less. Then let's learn together. Lucia looked at him. For the first time, there were no doubts in her gaze. No hidden pain, just a new calm, fragile but real. Okay, she said, but step by step with our feet on the ground. I don't know how to do it any other way, he replied, smiling. That night, when the children were asleep, Lucia and Alejandro went out into the garden. The sky was clear. The stars shone with a clarity that had been forgotten in the city. What will happen when you go back to your real life? She asked. This is my real life, he said. Everything else was just noise. Lucia leaned on his shoulder. It wasn't a promise nor a fairy tale. It was just a quiet night. And that, after so much, was enough. Part 14, The True Meaning of Home. For now, the days began to flow with unexpected gentleness. The house no longer seemed like a temporary refuge, but a home under construction. Every corner held something of them. The children's drawings hung on the walls, the mismatched cups Lucia found at the village market, the garden tools Alejandro bought without knowing how to use them, but with genuine enthusiasm. One morning, Mateo ran into the yard with a stick in his hand, shouting that he was a knight. Alejandro followed him with a broom, laughing like a child. Lucia watched them from the kitchen, her face illuminated by the sun and a peace she hadn't felt in years. After breakfast, Lucia took out her old laptop. It had a broken screen in one corner, but it still worked. With the help of a village network, she reopened her online teacher profile and began organizing virtual classes for children who couldn't attend school. It was little but enough to feel useful again. Do you see yourself doing that long term? Alejandro asked her that night as they watered the plants. I don't know, she replied, but it's a start. I like teaching. It reminds me who I am. You never forgot, he said. You just held it back for a while. Lucia looked at him tenderly. There was no longer distrust, only that natural caution of someone who has lived a lot and learned to go slow. One afternoon, while Alejandro unsuccessfully tried to plant tomatoes in the garden, the children ran towards him. Alejandro, Alejandro, Mama let us invite you to snack time. Snack time? What is there? Bread with chocolate and stories. Diego shouted. What if I read one this time? Alejandro asked, surprised by his own suggestion. Yes. Lucia waited for them on the porch, the table set, freshly baked bread, butter, hot chocolate, and the book Alejandro had given her weeks ago. He sat, surrounded by the children, and began to read aloud. His voice was firm but warm, and although he made mistakes in some words, the children corrected him with laughter. Lucia watched them in silence, her heart full. This man had left behind his offices, his suits, his comforts. He had exchanged all that for moments like these, not out of guilt, not out of obligation, but by choice. When the children fell asleep on the rug, Alejandro covered them with a blanket. Returning to the porch, he found Lucia leaning against the railing, gazing at the sky. Thank you for staying, she said without turning. Thank you for letting me stay, he replied. Lucia took his hand. It wasn't a declaration, nor a commitment. It was a way of saying, we are well. After all they had been through, that was more than enough. That night, as they closed the windows and turned off the lights, Alejandro stopped in front of the bathroom mirror. He no longer saw the perfect businessman, the man in expensive suits and a luxury watch. He saw someone simpler, more real, someone who, finally, had a place where he wanted to stay. And that place wasn't a city or a house. It was Lucia. It was the children. It was the life they had decided to build step by step, with scars, with history, but also with hope. Part 15, The Park Bench of Destiny. A fresh autumn evening, months later, Lucia and Alejandro returned to Madrid with the children. There were no appointments, no errands, no pending visits. Just a shared decision to close a cycle. They parked on a quiet street, away from the noise, and walked together to the park where it all began. The same bench, the same shade of the trees, but they were no longer the same. Lucia stopped in front of the bench, took a deep breath, and touched it with one hand. Not like someone reliving a wound, but like someone grateful to have survived it. That day, I thought I would never get up again, she said softly. That I would extinguish like a candle in front of my children. Alejandro sat down slowly. The children ran in the distance, among the swings, laughing as if the world had never been cruel. And I, he replied, thought I could go my whole life without feeling anything until I saw you. Lucia sat beside him. The wind played with her hair. The sun fell through the leaves with the same golden light as that day. But now there was no fear, no loneliness. Do you know what's most curious? She said, smiling with her eyes. It wasn't the money that saved me, or the house, or the documents. Then what was it? Was it that you didn't leave? Alejandro lowered his gaze, moved. It wasn't easy for me to stay either. I know, but you did anyway. They both fell silent, watching the children. Diego pushed Ricardo on the swing, while Mateo pretended to be a dragon. The sound of their laughter filled everything. Lucia intertwined her fingers with Alejandro's. There were no longer doubts or open wounds. What they had lived had shaped them but not defined them. They had chosen to rebuild with time, with care. Can you imagine if you hadn't turned around that day? She asked. I prefer to imagine that I was always going to find you one way or another, he replied with a soft smile. Lucia rested her head on his shoulder. They remained there for a while in silence, as if the world could stop without guilt. There was no need for grand words or eternal promises, because the true story had already been told, not with speeches, but with gestures, not with miracles, but with decisions. And so, on the very bench where pain had hit rock bottom, a new beginning was born. It wasn't a fairy tale, but it was real, and that, for them, was far more valuable. If this story touched your heart as much as it did ours in telling it, don't leave without dropping a comment. Have you ever felt that destiny crossed your path with someone who changed your life forever? Your opinion matters to us, and we want to read it. Give this video a thumbs up if you believe in second chances, and share it with someone who needs a dose of real hope. If you enjoyed this story full of humanity, struggle, and true connection, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our next stories. Here, every narrative comes from the soul and seeks to inspire. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching this video from? We want to know how far our stories reach.